Previously on Eat the Rich.
It's ruin, said Shu. It's ruin, I tell you, ruin. Without personal credit files or identity papers, we will never be able to locate debtors and persuade them into paying. Xenu showed no slightest sympathy. Crush them into paying. Blackmail them into paying, you mean? Shu agitatedly gestured at a chair for permission to sit and then wriggled into it. You promised! I promise nothing, said Xenu sharply. Then he relaxed. I brought you here, my piggy little friend, to give orders, not to make promises.
Oh my God.
The tax system is complete.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No sir, I'd be no average man.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have Shane.
Battle station.
We've got Chris.
Hello again.
And, of course, we've got Cari.
Hello.
So, on the last episode, if you haven't listened to that yet, please listen to it. We covered a little bit about, L. Ron Hubbard as a person and the early days of the Church of Scientology, right, on, through the 70s. We got into all the wacky Xenu shit, and I did definitely want to talk a little bit about the things that were going on, like, within the church at the time that was, that awful screenplay was written in 1977. So throughout the 1970s, from 1973 until like it all sort of came crashing down in 1977, the Church of Scientology was like engaged in one of the largest, probably almost certainly the largest, like civilian like espionage campaign, right? That's like ever in history, right? They had like I think about 5,000 different, like 5,000 people total that were involved in this and infiltrating and stealing from and breaking into 136 different government agencies, foreign embassies, consulates in more than 30 countries. And like the whole thing was like, like we said, at this point, the church and L. Ron Hubbard, they're being thrown out of, country after country. They're being, investigated and pursued because they're not paying taxes. They have like I think nearly $1 billion tax bill at this point, or at least several, at least in the hundreds of millions. It was like $1 billion by the late 80s. And so, he's been living in international waters, and L. Ron Hubbard has, and he's been in hiding. And so he plans and executes something that they called Operation Snow White, which was a campaign to purge unfavorable records about Scientology and about L. Ron Hubbard from government agencies, particularly the IRS, right? And they did this through wiretapping and bugging offices and breaking and entering and all sorts of stuff. So, but what L. Ron Hubbard called it though was what he told them was that they were correcting erroneous Scientology files, right? That they had to see what was going on there in the government, and so this was called Guardian Order 732. Execute Order 732.
So weird.
And so I'll go over this a little bit here, but so, I mean, I think 11 people total got arrested for it. Two of them were named Gerald Wolf and Michael Meisner. These two guys, they got jobs at the IRS as like clerks and typists and stuff. And so they got jobs in the IRS. They were like making copies illegally of documents. They were stealing documents and smuggling them out. In November 1974, they bugged a meeting, an IRS meeting that was about Scientology's tax-exempt status. They broke into the room and bugged the meeting room, and then after the meeting, they broke back in and removed the tape recorder, the recording device. By the end of the year in 1974, they supposedly had a stack of stolen documents 20 inches thick.
Jesus.
Yeah, that same year, by the end of that year, they were stealing documents from the IRS's chief counsel's office. Right around Christmas of 1974, they broke into the office of an attorney in the IRS's refund litigation service, where they took files out of her office, made copies of them, and then put the files back. Another Scientologist named Sharon Thomas got a job in the U.S. Coast Guard Intelligence Agency. Another one named Nancy Douglas got a job at the Drug Enforcement Agency, and all of these, the goal of all of these was to, again, steal documents and sabotage shit and bug shit and wiretap shit. So this went on, for several years. Oh yeah, they also they stole IRS stationery, right, so that they could forge letters that they pretended were from a disgruntled IRS employee.
Yikes!
And so that they could send out the files, and people would think that it came from an IRS. It came from within the IRS, right? They would publish them and something like that. They broke into the office of the lawyer who was representing the government in the church's lawsuit against the IRS numerous times throughout 1975. They made false IRS identification cards, which allowed them access to the federal courthouse in Washington, where they gained access to restricted areas and stole more documents. Oh yeah, the other thing that they were doing in the mid-70s is they were submitting all these Freedom of Information Act requests, thousands of them, right? All over the country. And they were all these different government agencies. And then the ones that would deny them, they would just break into their office and see what they had on them and stuff like that. And so this all sort of came crashing down when those two guys, Meisner and Wolf, that I was talking about, they got busted. And they got busted in one of the offices, and they got arrested. And this sort of came crashing down. And the government got onto them, and the FBI got onto them, and L. Ron Hubbard got away with everything. Actually, the person who took the fall was his wife, Mary Sue Hubbard. She was the head of the Guardian's office, right? Remember, the Guardian's is one of those the kind of front offices for it's like their public relations office for Scientology. But she was the head of that, so everything sort of came back to her instead of to L. Ron Hubbard. So she took the fall for that. She went to prison for she served the longest sentence. She went to federal prison for 5 years. There were 10 other Scientologists who got arrested. So in the summer of 1977, the FBI raided the church, their offices in Los Angeles and in Washington D.C. And like I said, it was the largest at the time. I don't think it still is, but at the time, it was the largest FBI raid in history. It involved 156 FBI agents. It lasted for 21 hours total. I guess that they were gathering stuff. They filled a 16-ton truck with documents and other items.
Wow,
probably e-meters and shit. So this was this was really a turning point for the church, because it was after this that, the heat was really on them, and L. Ron Hubbard was already paranoid and sort of in hiding. He'd already been living in international waters for several years, but this is the point where he sort of fades from public view. Actually, after 1980, he was never seen. He never made another public appearance. So it's in this time of this power vacuum, right? So this is where David Miscavige is able to consolidate power around himself. So David Miscavige, as we previously talked about a little bit, he was, he would have been he only would have been 17 in 1977 when all this sort of was going down. But he was working, in California directly under L. Ron Hubbard as like a camera operator for his Scientology training films, propaganda films, probably the fucking Xenu shit. If they'd ever made that new movie, David Miscavige probably would have been the one filming it. But Miscavige, and I talked about this a little bit on the last episode, he had been in the church since he was 9 years old. His father, who has now left the church, actually wrote a book about him, which I read, and it talks a lot about, how, like, the early days and how David got into the church, and, he was really a true believer because he was a fucking kid. He got into it at 9 years old. His fucking idiot father got him into it. Oh, here's a funny thing. Yeah, I want to mention this. You know how we said, like, it's like everything about Scientology is at like the crossroads of so many different types of scams, right? And so like even like the way David Miscavige's father Ron got even heard about Scientology for the first time is that he got like suckered into like a multi-level marketing scam called Holiday Magic that was like a cosmetics, like an early, like a fucking early pyramid scheme, right? It was selling cosmetics, and so he was doing that, and it was like while he was doing that he overheard someone talking about Scientology.
Oh, shit.
Hey, Scientology, what's that? Right? So that's how he first heard about it. And so then he got more heavily involved in it. He took his son, David. David was 9 when he first got audited, which he claimed cured his asthma. His father still contends that it cured his asthma. And this is one of the really stunning things when you read or listen to people who have left the church is that they all hate David Miscavige, but many of them still seem to be, if not true believers, at least they won't talk bad about it, right? They won't talk bad about L. Ron Hubbard, who we've just established is a fucking a freak and a lunatic and an awful person. But yeah, it's really, I was really struck reading the book by how Ron Miscavige would never talk bad about Scientology and still sort of claimed that it did work, that it did do things for him, that it cured his headaches and stuff like that. So yeah, like we said, David Miscavige gets into the Sea Org as a kid, and he starts moving his way up the ranks, and by I think it's 1977, he's become a member of what they called the Commodore Messengers Association. So yeah, the Commodore Messenger Association is sort of like the most elite fucking branch of Scientology. And so these were the people, like it started when Hubbard was still on the Apollo, the ship, when he was sailing around in international waters, and the Commodore Messenger Association, these were the ones who would, like, they were called the messengers because they were the ones that would answer directly to Hubbard and like do favors for him on the ship, right? Like if he had a message that he wanted to send to somebody else on another part of the ship, they were like the mail carriers. They would deliver items and news and things around the ship. But because of their close proximity to Hubbard, like closer than really anybody else, they really had a very outsized amount of power, even compared to people who had been in the church for years or decades, who like technically had a higher office or whatever, or a higher position.
Right.
But just because these were the people who saw Hubbard every day, that they ended up with more power, and Miscavige is one of those. And so like I said, yeah, by the early 80s, by 80, 81, L. Ron Hubbard is in total seclusion. No one ever saw him again publicly. In fact, Miscavige didn't have but so much contact with him after the 80s. He really only had two aides that were in contact with him regularly, named Pat and Annie Broker. They were longtime Scientologists. They had both been, I believe, Commodores, both been in the Sea Org. And these are the people that L. Ron Hubbard, I guess, intended to name as his successors, because he never named David Miscavige as a successor, never intended him to be the successor. But, throughout the 80s, David Miscavige does like a whole lot of sort of backstabbing and smearing of other people, like to Hubbard, right? He's like trying to play people against each other. I mean, very, very cleverly, right? I mean, he does. He gets what he wants, right? He is able to do it, even though he's a kid. He's like, 21 years old at the time, right? And he's outsmarting all these people and consolidating power among himself. And so one of L. Ron Hubbard's last statements or whatever that he made to the church was to he promoted himself to the rank of admiral, and then
Naturally.
Nice.
Yeah, he did.
Of course. Right. And then he also promoted the brokers who I just spoke about, Pat and Annie Broker, to the rank of loyal officer. Essentially, and what most people
Which is
thought,
the same lingo from Revolt in the Stars again.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, it's all, and it goes back to his Navy. Like, he was in the Navy in World War II.
Right,
all this
right,
shit
right,
is,
right.
It's all built on that. Like, so much of the mythology of L. Ron Hubbard and the church and all the lies he told about himself come from that, right? And so he names the brokers as essentially as his successors. And then when L. Ron Hubbard dies in 1986, David Miscavige, I suppose, takes it upon himself to. There was like a big. Have you ever seen like the meeting halls when they'll have like a big Scientology event?
Oh,
It
yeah,
looks like a
dude.
Nuremberg rally. And so it's like 2 weeks after Hubbard died, they have one of those. Miscavige comes out on stage and they got these big fucking they have like sconces with fire in them, and it's like very
so
like
good.
fascist
yeah.
symbolism. He's even got almost what looks like a military uniform or something. So he comes out and announces the death of L. Ron Hubbard.
He has now moved on to his next level of OT research. This level is beyond anything any one of us ever imagined. This level is in fact done in an exterior state, meaning that it is done completely exterior from the body. At this level of OT, the body is nothing more than an impediment and encumbrance to any further gain as an OT. Thus, at 2000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days. The body he had used to facilitate his existence in this messed universe had ceased to be useful, and in fact had become an impediment to the work he now must do outside of its confines. We felt it was important as Scientologists that you were the first to become aware of this fact.
And what's interesting about that is that he doesn't say, like, the way he phrases it, right? Like, he doesn't say that L. Ron Hubbard died. He says that L. Ron Hubbard,
He says he dropped his body.
Right. The research that he could do in his like earthly body was like he reached the end of it, and so he had to discard his meat sack or whatever in order to reach further layers or further levels of OT. But
I love
weird,
that video,
sir.
dude. It's so good.
it is good. But the catch is that all of L. Ron Hubbard's unpublished material was Pat Broker had it, right? The person who was supposed to be his successor. So David Miscavige and Marty Rathbun, who is also now left the church, but he used to be, he was the inspector general of the Religious Technical Center. He was one of the higher ups. But so him and Miscavige sort of hatch a plan to steal all this shit back. So it was all Hubbard's unpublished work, right? Like the new fucking OT fucking whatever, right? Like his new research, right? And so nobody had seen it yet. So David Miscavige sets up a meeting with Pat Broker, with lawyers in Washington, D.C., right, that they both had to attend. And so while David and Pat Broker are at this meeting, Marty Rathbun and a bunch of Scientologists show up at his ranch in Barstow, California, and tell the caretaker that there's an impending, they got tipped off about an impending FBI raid. The FBI is on their way. We need to take all the documents and everything Scientology related that you have to get it out of here for your safety. That's how they stole all that shit, and that's how David Miscavige sort of that was the last chip that the brokers had, right, as a claim to power, and that's how he was able to take that from them.
That's a genius move.
It is. I mean, he's certainly capable. You can't deny him that, but it's certainly the way he uses his intelligence and cunning or whatever you want to call it. It's really sick stuff. But so his first big PR victory, once he becomes the head of the church that cements his place is so in 1993 they finally reach a settlement with the IRS, and the IRS gives them tax exempt status. But it's so there's gotta be some really shady stuff going on there. It's like what I don't, because like, so just 10 years earlier, like this organization was like breaking into like dozens of IRS offices all over, right? You know what I'm saying? They were stealing fucking documents. The FBI raided them. They owed $1 billion in back taxes. And then also all through the 80s, they were filing dozens of lawsuits against the IRS, like nuisance lawsuits. They hired private investigators to dig into the private lives of IRS officials and like conduct surveillance on them. I don't know what they fucking had on them, right? I just, it's so bizarre that the IRS actually caved to this shit, right? To this harassment campaign, from the Church of Scientology. So I'm not. There's got to be some sort of underhanded dealing that went on there. I would really love to know what that is, because the fact that they just finally relented and just said, "Okay, you fuck it, fine, you're a church." You know what I'm saying? Just leave us alone. Just stop. You know? It's really, really stunning stuff.
On October the 1st, 1993, at 8:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the IRS issued letters recognizing Scientology and every one of its organizations as fully tax-exempt. The war is over!
Yeah, I mean, they really, they love to couch it in those sort of terms, right? They love to hide behind terms like religious freedom, right? So that was the big, and we're gonna probably use this as the closing music. But there's a great fucking video on YouTube of a music video of a song that the Church of Scientology released. It wasn't public. It was like played at one of those fucking Nuremberg rallies or something. But the song is called "We Stand Tall," I think. And it's like this celebratory song about how like we persevere and like we shall overcome type stuff, and like pretty much every shot in the fucking video there's like something that says religious freedom, like a banner on a building or like a sign on a march or something, right? They love to hide behind these concepts of religious freedom, right? And they love to turn around and spin any criticism of them as religious bigotry. Also, the other thing, one of the really funny things that like we were talking about yesterday is the way, like when you watch that Scientology network, the way they talk about human rights. Yeah. And hold on, let me see if I can find it. Because I was watching the damn Scientology network, and there was a commercial or something directed you to humanrights.com.
Which they own.
Which is a Scientology website. And it just...
right. I saw this.
It doesn't say anything, right? So I was watching the show and I was like, they're not fucking saying anything. They just keep saying human rights. And like, it was like this slickly produced, like, propaganda, where they're in Africa, like, teaching people human rights. And all they keep saying over and over again is that they're like teaching people human rights. Like, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything, and then you go to this website and like the word salad like even continues even more. It's like the first thing you see on this website is, let's start with some basic definitions. Human, a member of the Homo sapiens species, a man, woman, or child, a person.
No way.
Rights, things to which you are entitled or allowed, freedoms that are guaranteed. Human rights, the rights you have simply because you are human.
Webster's dictionary defines human rights.
They love to bring up MLK too. Like that's something I noticed a lot when I was watching the network. Like they just bring him up all the time when they're talking about this.
Absolutely, yeah. They got a picture of him on this website, and Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, and like you have to scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page before you see anything that like says this is about Scientology. But like this is the way they get you, right? And this is one of the things that they do with all the money they have, because all the money they have is ill-gotten. So they pretend that they do all this charitable work, right? Which I've seen or I've heard Mike Rinder, who again is one of the high-profile defectors of the church. Like to hear him describe it, what they do is they'll send out like a message to all their members that like we're soliciting donations for the charitable work we're doing in Africa or like in Haiti or like after the tornadoes somewhere, after a hurricane, right? We're doing all this humanitarian work, and then they'll collect millions of dollars from their followers, right? And then what they'll do is they'll send just like a few people in a camera crew to Africa or wherever they say they're collecting money. money for, they'll like shoot a propaganda video, like a staged video, and then they'll show the video and it's like, look, see, this is what your money does, right? This is all the good that your money goes to. So you now need to give more money. And I was trying to find if I could find any sort of records about like specifics about their charitable giving. And I could not, but but in looking, I found something on the Scientology website about so let me just read this real quick. Does Scientology believe in charity and welfare? It does. However, Scientologists also believe in the principle that some form of exchange is necessary in any relationship. If a person
What the fuck does that mean?
if a person only receives and never gives, he will lose his own self-respect and become an unhappy person. Therefore, Scientology-sponsored charity programs often encourage those receiving the charity to make their own contribution in exchange by personally helping others who are in need. Such contributions enable one to receive help and yet maintain their self-respect. This is another one of those little turns of phrase that they like to use. So like they what they call it is in exchange, right? This is how they justify, in particular, making people pay for the fucking auditing and stuff like that, and to reach new levels on the fucking bridge, to reach new OT levels or whatever, right? So like, you have to, you have to give something back to receive it. You have to give to receive, right? So you give $15,000, and then you fucking get to hold the fucking e-meter cans and whatever. I don't know, but like that's the way they justify it, right? And so this is how they justify people spending greater and greater and greater sums of money for the auditing sessions. I mean, they
what they're discussing is a business model, basically.
Absolutely, and yeah, we should talk a bit about the business model, right? And like in that, there's essentially like two main types of Scientologists, right? There's the people who are in the Sea Org, or the people who live at like the building in Clearwater, or the people who live at the Gold Base in Hemet, California. Like these are the people that are like literally like physically controlled by them, right? These are the people that are basically in a sense held captive, right? These people have no money. These people are paid. It used to be $30 a week. I believe it's maybe now a $50 a week stipend. They're paid, but the main cash cow is like the whales, right? They're big spenders, the celebrities, people like that. I mean, but like the average person who's not in the Sea Org, who has to spend money for these auditing sessions and everything. If you're in the church for a couple decades, you could spend $200,000 or $300,000 easily.
Right.
And people do. I mean, they're still making $2 to $4 million a week, according to Mike Render, through their facilities. The facility just in Clearwater, right? So Clearwater is like this. Their building there is like the spiritual or whatever home of Scientology, right?
They like own Clearwater, basically. Yeah.
They do. They absolutely do. So that is where. So if you're a Scientologist and you live in Europe or Asia or wherever, you live somewhere else in the country, you go to Clearwater. That's where you have to go to get your auditing sessions. All the money for that shit comes in through the center in Clearwater.
I got a whole thing on the Clearwater too for the real estate thing.
Take it, man. Let's hear it.
Yeah. Now?
Yeah. Let's we're talking about the business model.
Yeah, I mean, let me just open this up here. I mean, so if we want to talk about like Scientology's real estate practices, I mean, this I think from what I can see kind of represents just an enormous bulk of just business, just like assets, liabilities, just balance sheet shit. I mean, real business, and so there's a few facets to this, but since we're talking about it, we should talk about Clearwater. And the Tampa Bay Times had this fabulous kind of project that they put together in October of 2019, which I'm going to read from now, which they called Clear Takeover. And I think, like you were saying, Cari, I mean, it's exactly that. It was just an enormous amount of assets. And they own a huge amount of the city. And so it says here, sorry, you're going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that, like, I lived like 10 minutes from there. And I remember like the first time I drove through, and like one of my friends who had lived in Clearwater forever was like, you see all of these buildings that we're driving by, like these are all Scientology buildings. And it is just, it's like overwhelming when you see like the scope of all the shit that they own.
And many of them are sitting empty.
Yes, they're just vacant buildings.
They don't use them. Yeah, they don't use them.
And it's not, what you're saying is not hyperbolic at all, because, and I'll just get into this now. So they have this cool thing, and I'm just going to like scroll down here as it brings you to these kind of stages of understanding. And it says, Scientology came to downtown Clearwater in 1975. It brought a hotel and wrote plans to take control of the city. Whatever the fuck that means.
Normal.
The church's campus grew slowly over decades. Its members bought property in surrounding blocks. And as you're scrolling through here, it just like pops up these properties and properties and properties and illuminates more and more and more of the downtown. Then in 2017, companies controlled by parishioners began buying retail property at an unprecedented rate. They doubled the church's footprint in less than 3 years. The impact is clearest in the heart of the downtown. Take away the church footprint, a few condo towers, and all buildings are owned by the government. Look how little is left. And again, it's just a smattering, maybe, like 18, 20% of the downtown is not owned by the Church of Scientology. Then walk down Cleveland Street, downtown's main artery, and it takes you through it and just shows you how many freaking buildings are there. Leading up to the waterfront, 22 of the first 33 buildings now have ties to Scientology. And it goes on to say the Church of Scientology and companies run by its members. Again, that's an interesting turn of phrase too, because it shows you that it's an apparatus beyond just the direct ownership of the church.
Right.
Spent $103 million over the past 3 years buying up vast sections of downtown Clearwater. They now own most commercial property on every block within walking distance of the waterfront, putting the secretive church firmly in control of the area's future. It says most of the sales have not previously been reported. The Tampa Bay Times discovered them by reviewing more than 1,000 deeds and business records, then interviewed more than 90 people to reconstruct the circumstances surrounding the transactions. Even city leaders said they didn't know the full extent of the purchases until they were shown maps created by the Times. So, we've got some other stuff to get into, so I don't really want to get into the meat and potatoes, the nitty-gritty of this, which they do discuss. But, just an astounding amount of real estate owned by this single church. So there's 2 articles that I want to... Okay, there's 3 articles that I want to talk about here.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
The first one is on L.A., just L.A.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a article here by Curbed, L.A. Curbed, which is called Mapping Scientology's Impressive LA Real Estate Empire. This is from September of 2018 by Pauline O'Connor. And I'm just going to list the amount of buildings that they own here. The Braley Building. It's the nationally registered building in Old Town, Pasadena, built in 1906 as a bicycle factory, purchased for $10 million. It became one of the group's ideal orgs in 2010. Chateau Elysee. Scientology's jewel in the I gave it my best. Je ne parle pas français. It's housed in the old Chateau Elysee, a 7-story 1929 French Normandy revival chateau in Hollywood's Franklin Village, which the church purchased in 1973 for $1.5 million, which frankly is a steal.
It's basically free.
So I'm just going to just speed round to these. El Cadiz Apartments from 1936, bought by the church in 2004. Hollywood Guarantee Building, a 1923 building, which is now a home to the L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibition.
Of course.
Which is just medals from military branches that don't exist.
They have a church. They have a museum in Clearwater too, which
is it open to the public?
To go to. Is it?
I don't know. I don't
to
know if it is. We should just go. Just drive down there.
Yeah.
Hollywood Congregational Church, Hollywood Savings and Loan Building, the former Christie Hotel, New Church of Scientology, which was a brand new, huge, facility that they have on New Hampshire Avenue. This is a little weird. Psychiatry, an Industry of Death Museum.
Dude. God, I want to go to that so bad.
So this is the headquarters of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
God.
Very odd. They also, and this is a big deal here, they bought KCET Studios. Says on a 4.5-acre lot, the historic studio and longtime base of public television station KCET was sold to the church in 2011 for a reported $42 million. It's now home to Scientology Media Productions.
Yes.
So they have a Hollywood studio.
I saw this on their Scientology network yesterday. They were talking.
Yeah,
about
this
it.
was
It's right in the same part of town. It's like where all the other major studios are.
The really interesting thing when they got into it on the show that I was watching was like you can really get like a sense of how much they've kind of intertwined themselves in that like local, not just the celebrity community, but like the community of like VFX artists and like producers and all this stuff. Like they had people on the Scientology network who like work in Hollywood, and they were just like going through their like day-to-day jobs and like the stuff that they do and like how they get equipment and stuff to like really like normalize it and make it seem like, look how cool and hip and connected we are. One lady was like, I drive by the Harry Potter castle on the way to work every day. It's so cool. I love being here. And it was just like, it's sick. It's like very insidious.
I like this one too. This reminded me of the film We Bought a Zoo. We bought a hospital. They bought former Cedars of Lebanon Hospital for $5 million in 1976. It's the group's West Coast HQ and Sea Org base. They bought a dissemination and distribution center, 185,000 square foot facility, including a custom-built 121 web press, which I don't know what that is. I think it's like a printing press or something like that. Inglewood Community Center. They bought Inglewood Ideal Org Center. Gold Base, which was a vacation resort on 500 acres outside of San Jacinto. A former Masonic lodge, because what's a religion without taking over others. But I really want to discuss this article from 2015, in fact, where they talk about the buildings that they own, or the real estate that they own, even outside of kind of their like hubs. Hub locations. Right. And so there was an article here from livable.com, because they do the thing with like no vowels or whatever, livable. And it's from April of 2015, called The Surprising Truth About Scientology's Ever-Expanding Collection of Real Estate. And so again, I'm just kind of do a speed round here, but essentially it says here, in 2004, the church launched an initiative for property acquisition, hoping to increase its visibility throughout the world. The church, which was established, uses aggressive fundraising among its members to grow its real estate portfolio, estimated to be worth $1.5 billion.
Nice.
According to the blog, The Scientology Money Project by Jeffrey Augustine. So let's see here. So in Boston, Church of Scientology bought for $10.5 million, 448 Beacon Street. In Cincinnati, they bought for $500,000 this 223 West 4th Street, which was this former publishing house. Kansas City, for $5 million, they bought this item on Grand Boulevard, which was a former City National Bank building. Philadelphia, they bought the Cunningham Piano Building, which was unoccupied for 6 years. They bought it for about $8 million.
What's the address?
It actually doesn't say. It actually doesn't. And I'm not saying that to
public record. Yeah, someone figured it out.
I'm just curious.
Chicago.
Nearest hardware store.
Okay, Chicago. They bought a building on Printers Row. Montreal. This is interesting. An investigation by Metro, a local newspaper, revealed that Church of Scientology owes the city of Montreal $117,000 in unpaid taxes, in addition to penalties and interest for the La Patrie building on 180 St. Catherine.
Wait, how does
East.
that work if they're tax exempt?
So on their real
Maybe
estate,
not in Canada?
they still have to pay taxes on the buildings they own, right? Not all of them. So this is the scam that they pull. One of the reasons that they buy up all this fucking real estate is like, as a charitable, quote unquote, like charitable organization, a tax exempt religious organization, they're not supposed to have billions of dollars sitting around on hand, right? So like having billions of dollars sitting around is the kind of thing that's going to make the IRS want to take a look at you, right? And there's nothing that they fear more, specifically David Miscavige, there's nothing that they fear more than actually having somebody take a look into the details of this stuff, or him having to be brought in for questioning or deposed or anything like that, right? So what they do is that they spend so much of this money, and like we said, many of these buildings are just sitting empty, but this is just a way to fucking burn up the money that they have so that they don't have it all sitting around in a bank account, right? So they can buy up these buildings and they can call them religious centers or churches or whatever like that.
Right.
But yeah, so they claim to be, and this may very well be true, they claim to be the largest taxpayer in Clearwater, which, because they own fucking 80% or whatever of the fucking buildings, they own fucking most of the real estate in the city. Sure, that may be true, but they're not paying anywhere near the amount of taxes that they would have to pay if they weren't a church.
So this is really
Right?
just like an
Right,
asset
right.
management strategy for them to be able to like have all these assets without having cash. And then it does have the side
For sure.
effect, which like Mike Rinder talks about a lot, that they like create this illusion that they have this huge presence. Like I said, like driving through there and realizing that they own all this stuff is like overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, they really have a presence here. This is huge. It creates this idea that they have a lot more members than they actually have, which is really not that many.
Right.
No, their membership is tanking. The internet has not been kind. to
The failing Church of Scientology.
Which is, again, why the same kind of concept is why they have this fucking TV network, right? Is
Yes.
to present this, to generate positive PR for themselves and also to like present this outsized version of them as an institution, right? It's to present themselves as having, millions and millions of members all around the world, normal people just like you. And it's all
And they are like
very effective propaganda.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, they are, like, really extremely adept at doing that and, like, adapting the language of the internet and, like, of influencers to make them seem like they have a presence that they don't have. And that was a little bit of what I was going to talk about later. But it is, like, really impressive, like, the propaganda machine that they've basically created.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that wraps it up. I mean, they've got some international properties in the UK as well, but long and short of it is that they have $1.5 billion as of the time of that publication worth of real estate.
Do they have insurance on all the buildings?
Shame.
In Philadelphia.
I'm curious. I'm just curious
Google.
as to whether or not they're protecting their many
I'm
assets.
worried about them.
Or if they're very much in play.
I mean, I assume also that I assume as well that one of the big, also ideas behind buying up all this real estate is just to flip it, fucking, and continue to make
That was
money,
my question.
Sure,
Like,
right,
do
yeah.
they
down the
flip
road.
it? Because, like, I know in Clearwater,
I mean,
they
it
keep
sounds
the buildings.
it sounds almost like a kind of like a legal version of money laundering to me. I mean, that's
probably,
what
yeah.
it seems like. Like you dump your money instead of like creating like a holding company or whatever. You just dump your money in something where you have to you can pay minimal taxes on it, but it looks like you're expending a lot. Then again, like you were saying, Chris, you can flip it. I mean, it was like, me and Cari have been watching Narcos the last couple of weeks. The
It's really
Netflix
good, by the
show
way.
about
Really
like
recommend it.
Escobar, and there was like a point where they were bringing in so much fucking cash on hand that they couldn't like spend or like put in banks, and they were literally just burying it.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, and it sounds like the same kind of thing, right? They're burying it basically to avoid having to deal with the fact that like we have, if you're pulling in like what you were saying, like $4 million a week just from Clearwater,
Just through Clearwater.
like that's an insane amount. Like, I mean, even like spending that amount of money that's regularly coming in is like a fucking Brewster's Millions nightmare. like what do you fucking how do you get rid of it, right? How do you make it not appear, and still be able to maintain your lavish lifestyle with like personal slaves on ships or whatever the fuck it is that Miscavige has.
Something that I wanted to touch on the stuff that you were talking about, if you're wrapping it up, Dwight, is that like I got into reading like a lot of like recent local articles from Clearwater just because I haven't obviously since I moved here like kept up with like local news or whatever. And there was like, like you were saying, they had to like dig through all these records to like figure out exactly what the footprint was. There was like this recent article about how these two like obviously very rich people had recently donated and broken ground on like a huge building for the Humane Society of Pinellas County, and it was like a $4 million investment that they had made. And then like buried in the article was like they're also prominent Scientologists. So it's not even just like what are the official church buildings, it's like who are the people who are like extremely influential and powerful in this community who are also like increasing that footprint and like increasing their influence like without it explicitly being the church. And then like the article that I read right after that was like they wanted somebody on like the Clearwater City Council was trying to say, hey, this whole plan that Scientology now has to like revamp the waterfront, this is not good. Like they have an outsized amount of influence. We should investigate it. And it was literally one guy on the city council and everybody else on the city council voted against investigating it. So these people are all either, probably actively Scientologists or, in their pockets, like they're being paid by Scientology.
Oh, for
or they're
sure.
afraid of them, which is valid also.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it all. I mean, because we've seen, as we've just discussed, the links to which they would go in the 70s to embed themselves in all of these, government organizations, right, all around the world. Certainly, embedding oneself in like a city council or something, right, in order to gain favorable outcomes for the church is definitely not outside the realm of possibility. Nor is these people being paid off.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so certain, like especially. And we'll get to it, I'm sure, later. But like the thing about David Miscavige's wife, who has been missing for 13 years, she hasn't been seen in public. I mean, there have been welfare checks done on her, Leah Remini. Yeah, supposedly, right? So, like, according to the LAPD, they've contacted her in person, and she's fine.
Yeah, they're like, don't worry about it.
Don't worry, it's good. It's fine. It's totally fine.
See her,
don't ignore our big stacks of money. Right? No, you can't see her.
My wife is totally fine. T-shirt is
just like they call her
raising more questions.
They call her and it's just David Miscavige talking in like a really high pitched voice saying he's fine. Like I don't know.
I'm all right.
It's like when Homer does the Marge voice.
Yeah. I mean, I can, if we're like touching on the stuff of like people being intimidated or whatever, that kind of ties into like the first little anecdote that I had about the celebrity stuff. And I can go into that now, unless there's something else that we want to go, and we can cut this us chatting.
Let's go.
Do you want me to go into that?
Let's get into it.
Hit it.
So,
keep the chat and keep it all, dude.
I wanted to talk a little bit about like the celebrity connection. And then as I like started to like think about it and look into it, and I started watching like the Scientology network, I thought there might be like a more interesting angle on it. But everybody knows like Tom Cruise's ties to the church. Everybody knows like Leah Remini was very prominent in the church and then left, and a lot of like Travolta, yeah. And actually somebody that I found out that I didn't know before I was doing research for this was my favorite actor, Giovanni Ribisi, is a Scientologist.
Is she?
Bummer.
Did you know Greta Van Susteren is
really?
a Scientologist?
Really?
And her
no
husband.
shit.
Who else is?
No shit.
Yeah.
No fucking shit. Greta Van Susteren?
Yeah.
No shit,
Long
dude.
time.
Oh, man.
I regret that one of my favorite jazz artists of all time, Chick Corea, unfortunately, is a Scientologist as well.
Elizabeth Moss also. Yeah.
What?
But
Lost another one to the Church of Scientology.
the little anecdote that I came across.
Wait, this guy is Giovanni Ribisi?
Yeah, you don't know Giovanni Ribisi?
First of all,
he's my favorite actor.
I know this
Boiler
actor.
Room.
You gotta have a simpler name.
I think it's a great name.
But,
obviously, he's bad.
Oh, here's some more anti-Italian shit, Shane.
Anyway,
whatever.
So there's like the main ones everybody knows about. But while I was looking into this, I came across like a list of like Scientologists that had left, and I somebody that was listed on there was Grammy Award-winning artist Beck. But the interesting thing there that I saw was that he didn't like leave the church. He just like in an interview a couple of years ago was like, "Oh yeah, I've never been a Scientologist."
I remember that too. And I never questioned it.
Right, and I wouldn't have questioned it either. But I started like looking into it, and he had like very clearly in like several interviews said in the past, like, I am a Scientologist. I'm a member of the Church of Scientology, and he was married to Giovanni Ribisi's sister, and he said this, "I'm not a Scientologist, and I never have been," after he divorced her. She's also a prominent Scientologist. Like their whole family is like tied into it. I think Beck's father is also a Scientologist. And Leah Remini, when this came out in this interview that he said, "I've never been a Scientologist," she called this a pussy move and an attempt to avoid being attacked by the church. And the pussy move is a direct quote.
Wow.
And he's like a millionaire, and he's like a Grammy Award-winning artist. He's like an A-list celebrity, and he's like obviously like the only justification for him doing this is that he's like scared and doesn't want to deal with the church harassing him and stalking. Like we haven't gotten super into this, but they just hire like several private investigators to like dig through your trash and like ruin your life, basically.
Right.
But what was really interesting to me, then like pivoting off of that, they obviously like Leah Remini and Mike Rinder were willing to make that calculation and speak out. And as I watched like Leah Remini's documentary, I started to like lose sympathy for them. But like somebody like Beck, somebody who's like, somebody with like a lot of social influence being scared to speak out, that like kind of put that in perspective for me, like the danger that they're putting themselves in. And then on top of that, the complications of leaving Scientology and speaking out, even as somebody with a lot of power and social influence, were like further illustrated by this other kind of like weird scenario that I found with Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith, who are like frequently cited as being Scientologists, right? Like it's like kind of one of those things that comes up about them a lot. But I guess Leah Remini mentioned in one of her books that she had seen them at the Celebrity Center, and she like, you know, basically said an anecdote about them in her book. And Jada Pinkett Smith came out and like really like vehemently denied this and said like, we're not Scientologists, I study all religions, et cetera, et cetera. And then later on, Leah Remini went on her podcast and like kind of buried the hatchet with her and, you know, said, I'm sorry, like I didn't mean to like put you in a weird position. I know you're not a Scientologist, all this stuff, even though Jada Pinkett Smith, by her own admission, like goes to the Celebrity Center and is like kind of in Scientology, like dipping her toes in. But like what that made me think is like she has some kind of personal relationship with the Smiths. Obviously, like they were like friends. And it's like, what does the church have on Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith that like Leah Remini was willing to be this much more forgiving with them versus like her attitude toward back of like him pussying out? Like there must have been something that Jada Pinkett Smith came to her as a friend and was like, please, like don't make us, like don't expose us like this or whatever. Don't make us have to like deny this and like speak out against it. So yeah, that was, it's depressing because you think about like somebody with a lot of social capital not being able to speak out, and you think about like a regular person trying to leave and think about what that's like. It's like a regular person who doesn't have like money and influence. It's impossible.
Sure. Right. And it's, yeah, I mean, as far as, I mean, this is the main thing I've been thinking about a lot as far as this shit goes. Because there is, you know, there's a lot of stuff about Scientology, like the Xenu shit. There's a lot of like goofy, silly shit. It is ridiculous on its face, right? It is to be laughed at.
Yeah.
But it is also extremely damaging and dangerous and abusive to people in that. And like, so like just for the average person to leave, right, to like a member of the Sea Org or something, you like imagine you've been a Scientologist for 20 years. Right? Since you were a teenager or something. Yeah, you have nothing. If you leave, you won't have an education. You've never had a job. You don't have any money. All of your friends and family are in Scientology. You don't know anything but it. You have no place to go. And then if you do go, you know, everybody that you've ever known or cared about is going to disconnect from you, and they're going to, you know, lie about you and smear you. Because this is the other thing the church does, right? Is like when you do leave, like any high profile celebrity or any person who's left the church. Like if you Google their name, like if you Google Leah Remini or Tom DeVoe or Ron Miscavige, Mike Rinder, any of these people, like one of the top results for all of them is going to be a website that the church has made about them to smear them. Like who is the real MikeRinder.com or something. He's a wife beater and this and this, and they say all sorts of horrible things. Like he didn't leave. We kicked him out because we caught him stealing, or he's a drug addict or whatever. Those make up anything that they can.
They'll make like videos with people who are still in the church, who are their family, saying like, my father is a drug addict and a criminal and he beat me. Like it's really sick. They like tear families apart, and you know, the people who are still in the church feel like powerless to do anything. That was one of the things that really struck me when I was watching that Leah Remini documentary. It was like how they really just genuinely tear families apart and separate families from children. And I think like we talked about yesterday, one of the things that they use to do that is like this tool of like, nobody's really a child. Like they just kind of, which is a classic cult tactic, like they diminish the importance of family ties and the importance of like personal connections or whatever as like in the process of brainwashing. So you're like 25 and you've been told this your whole life, and that you've just completely internalized it. And if your mother then wants to leave Scientology or something, she's just dead to you.
Right.
This is what's so. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but like this is the thing. Hearing about this that's so terrifying to me is like also in the same thing that we've talked about as a doctrine very early in this show, which is like ExxonMobil, for instance, has like there's no founder that is the zealot that perpetuates it.
Yes.
It becomes its own entity. Like L. Ron Hubbard has been dead for whatever, like 40 years or whatever, right? But it's its own entity that continues to perpetuate itself. Like it has its own personality and its own characteristics and its own self-interest, which continues irrespective of individuals.
Right.
I mean, Hubbard is dead, but, you know, no one's ever really
Well, he's not dead. He dropped his body and he's still continuing his research.
He's still researching.
They still have his house there for him with a full staff and everything. So let's be clear.
I am every voice you have ever heard in your head.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really heartbreaking when you hear like some of the personal stories about people. I mean, and there's also like really ridiculous funny stories. Like one of the things that comes up toward the end of the Leah Remini doc is like one guy who left Scientology. He had like a neighbor who really liked his dog who stayed a Scientologist, and she had to like officially disconnect from his dog because she had like a little door in her fence to let the dog through, and she was really attached to the dog and wanted to keep a relationship with the dog only. But I guess the church told her no. So she like sent him a letter saying, I'm disconnecting from your dog as like a suppressive person, which is really fucking funny. Like, come on.
Can we do that to Rolo? Can we declare Rolo unsuppressive? And he just looks at us with that face.
And so this is the idea. This is the thing I talked about. I mentioned briefly on the last episode, the in theta, interpolated theta, right? So like this is what, like, if you are a believer, if you're still in the church, and like your family member or your friend or whatever leaves, right? Like this is what they tell you. Like this is what Hubbard said. This is church doctrine. This is what Miscavige continues to say, is that you like for your safety, you have to disconnect from this person because this person is now interpolated thetan, right? So if you have contact with this person, you could get physically sick. You could die. Like bad things are going to happen to you if you continue to have contact with this person. And if you continue to have contact with this person, then you are going to become a potential trouble source, right? And then we're going to have to disconnect from you as well. Like this is the fear that the people, like the families and the friends of the people who leave, have themselves, right? Is that they have to disconnect from the people they love, because if they don't, they're going to have to leave too, right? They're going to have nothing.
And
also,
they also stress like there's no way to fix these people. Like these people are inherently bad, and there's nothing you can do to help them.
Right. And if you do continue to have contact with these people, again, like one of the things that they cement in these people's minds is that any bad thing that happens to you is you deserved it to happen, right? So if you go against the church doctrine and you don't disconnect from these people, and if we tell you that we're going to make a video where you're saying, my husband or my wife or my father or whatever is abusive and a drunk and a thief and a liar or whatever, like you have to do this, and if you don't, you're responsible for the bad things that happen, right? Because this is what we need to do. This is your part in saving humanity. This is your part in saving mankind. We have to preserve the church, is what it is, right? I mean, that concept of fair game that we talked about, that like Hubbard, wrote about in the 60s, that's still very much, church doctrine. Remember Pat Broker, the guy I told you about that was Hubbard's official, named successor, the one that Miscavige stole the documents from. Pat Broker left the church in 1989. David Miscavige paid two former cop private investigators, $10 million over 25 years. They followed him for 25 years. They followed him from Wyoming to the Czech Republic, everywhere he moved. They followed this guy after he left the church for 25 years.
That's so crazy.
This is the degree that they'll go to. And this is people like Mike Rinder, other high-profile people who've left the church, this is what they do to these people. This is where the money goes, right? And this,
not only just also like defectors and people, I remember like Louis Theroux, the British documentary filmmaker, made a Scientology doc a couple years ago, which I found interesting, maybe not as much as some of his other work, but one of the points in it, he talks about like basically not being able to do the kind of documentary he usually does because of the tightness and like the security that they have. They don't they're not going to let anybody speak to you, right? But in addition, there's like a number of sequences in the movie where he's like driving around trying to like talk to people or whatever, and he realizes like he's just being tailed the entire time. Right. He's being tailed by like, I guess hardcore members, true believers, whatever, fanatics within the organization, who then their assignment is like, okay, for however long this guy's doing this documentary for the next couple of months, your 24-hour job is to drive around and follow him and keep tabs on him, records, whatever. Like, and it's like a secret police operation. I mean, and not basically
not only that, but like one thing that was shown, I unfortunately don't remember. I think it might have been like a crew from the BBC, but like they will literally like approach people who are like researching Scientology, like journalists, even like researchers. Like there was a professor on the docuseries that was on there who just like has done research into cults and Scientology. Like they will like go up to people and try to goad them into physically assaulting them so that they can sue them. And they've done this to like journalists. They'll get in their face so that way the journalist like tries to like push them away. And then it's like, you just assaulted me, now I'm going to sue you. And they have like a million fucking lawyers that are Scientologists, and they're just ready to do this and like ruin anybody's life at any time. Anybody who's like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, you were mentioning it a little bit earlier when you were talking about like the kind of people who are in the church, or at least the ones that they put forward, like on the Scientology network or whatever. I mean, it's a tried and true tactic of recruitment, right? Like for a group like this to like go after people in various professional fields, right? Like, you know, you want people who are like lawyers, high profile people, you know, people who make a lot of money for the obvious reason of like, hey, you can like milk somebody who makes a lot of money versus somebody who's like very poor, right? It might be harder to do so. But on the other hand, like then you basically have your own internal group of dedicated people who have all these like sophisticated skills, whether it's like, you know, in the legal stuff or like in business or, you know, having media contacts, you know, media experience. So then you can produce your own stuff. Like you specifically target that group of people for a financial purpose, but then ultimately then, you know, they can act as like arms of that machine, right? They can do those things on your behalf. And Scientology is not like unique in that strategy. A lot of other groups do that. But you know, they're very good at it.
If you'd like here, it might make sense for me to then get into the meet a Scientologist thing and the micro celebrity thing I was talking about, because it is like related to what you were saying, how they will like target and recruit specific people. Chris, when you told me about that Scientology network, the very first thing that I saw, which kind of like set my mind racing and thinking about, you know, the church's like propaganda strategy and like the way that they're using new media, is there was this segment and it was called Meet a Scientologist. And it was this guy, his name was Aaron Cairo. And I checked him out, and he is a YouTuber, and he's got like millions of subscribers, like just millions. He's like a skateboarding YouTuber. Seems like a totally normal guy. And of course, like throughout the course of this segment, he's just like talking about his life. He's talking about how he had points where he was working as a valet driver and he didn't have any fucking money, and he like lost his job and he was like so miserable. And he talks about the process of like starting a YouTube channel and realizing that people wanted to see this content. And he talks about becoming successful. And then, you know, the end of the segment was just like, my name is Aaron Cairo. I'm a skater, a YouTuber, a loving husband and father, and I'm a Scientologist. And this is, you know, I was like, what the fuck? So I went onto the website, which they have a separate website called like meetascientologist.tv. And it's got, I think, like 3 or 4 seasons. And they have all these people that are like not quite celebrities, right? But they're people who have like won niche reality TV competitions. They're moderately successful musicians that are like not super known outside their genres, but within their genres, they're like the best ones. And they even had a former NFL football player. I don't think he had like a super notable career. It's not anybody you would have heard of, but like, you know, if I'm like a football guy and I see that, I'm like, oh, this guy's a Scientologist. I didn't know that. That's so cool.
Right.
So these are not like unrelatable A-list celebrities. Like nobody's going to look at Tom Cruise and be like, oh, this guy's so relatable. I relate to Tom Cruise. These are people that a normal person is going to have stuff in common with. It's going to be easy to identify with them. And there's like, again, 3 or 4 seasons of this, and they have really prominently displayed on the website that the show has won several Telly Awards, which is apparently, from what I saw, looking at the deleted Wikipedia page, discussion page, just like a made-up awards show where people just buy awards.
Is it a Scientology thing?
It is. I mean, it's. I couldn't make the connection if it was directly a Scientology thing. It's been around for several decades, but on the Judges Council, there is somebody who, under her name on the Judges Council page, says Scientology Media Productions. So they have, like, they're like in it. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that they're in and they're aware of and they're buying awards from for all their TV shows. So they are, they're like recruiting people like this that are existing influencers within like niche spheres, which is, you know, a recruitment tactic and a propaganda tactic. And this is like really super high production value stuff. You know, like we were talking about, they are like really in Hollywood. Like they have a network of like the thing that made me really sad that I think I was talking about in the Discord was like there was this guy named Brian who was just like a VFX artist, and he was like talking about his life, and it was like, this is just like a regular guy who probably makes a regular salary, who just somebody from the church who like sucked him into this came and told him like, hey, you have to be in this segment now and be on TV and talk about how cool it is to like live in LA and be a Scientologist or whatever. And it's none of it is framed as being directly related to Scientology. It's all framed as like self-improvement. Right. And
absolutely, yeah.
And they're not just doing this with like existing people who are successful in their field or like influencers. They're trying to create the illusion that they have like their own influencers, right? So before checking out the network, which was obviously a goldmine, I had already like been a little bit familiar with the way that they use new media just from watching the Leah Remini documentary and then like Googling and stuff. And we touched a little bit on this with that like network of bots that they basically made to combat that docuseries, which was based around Stand. And they made a bunch of like Twitter accounts that were Scientologists taking action against discrimination, which was like an organization against religious bigotry. Like within minutes, as soon as the documentary aired, they had like thousands of accounts posting about it, right? Like they knew exactly what to do on social media to like get trending. And eventually that obviously got found out and banned. But what was, there still is like some kind of network in place that they have on Twitter. So they did this, they have this like whole series of what looks like just like regular people sitting at home with a webcam, but again, is very like high quality, like high production value stuff of just people doing like a 1 to 2 minute video. And there were like dozens of these videos. And again, some of them were Spanish language. I watched a lot of the Spanish language ones, and it was like, you know, my name is Eliana or whatever name, and I have been at home and I've been trying to find like self-improvement stuff. It's so hard with COVID, blah, 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 blah. And then the conclusion of all of the videos is, this is the book that I've been reading that really helps me. And it's like one of the Scientology books. And I couldn't find like real social media accounts for any of these people. I looked up like dozens of them. They don't appear to be real people at all. They're trying to use the lingo of like influencer communities and like Instagram and all this stuff to create the illusion that they have an organic internet community, but they don't. And it's done like they must have people who are adept at using social media doing this stuff. Because if you're just like a regular person watching this and you come across this video outside of the context of knowing Scientology is bullshit, it does just look like a regular woman who lives in Colombia being like, check out this book that like really helped me and my internet friends. And
out of I was just gonna say, out of curiosity, like as you're saying, you know, that it seems like it's, you know, kind of a inflated or a not real internet community. When was this posted Moscow time?
We're doing Russiagate now. Yeah, I mean, it's like
Xenu.
I watched I spent like 2 hours watching these videos because it was just really interesting to me, because it's literally just the church mimicking this kind of usually organic and individually produced content that I've seen on like Instagram and stuff. It's kind of similar to the stuff you were saying. There was like a lady selling 24 karat gold skincare cream or whatever.
Yes. So good.
And they've just taken this like new language that exists on the internet and transformed it into like something that they can use as a recruitment tool, or, you know, they're dressing up the church in this like new media. And it is like scary. Like, it's funny. It's obviously like fucked up and funny, but it's also like scary when you think about it, because this is one of like the main avenues that they probably use for recruitment.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, that you say that, and to look at a lot of the stuff that's on the Scientology network. And there's a lot, like, there's a lot, especially with COVID going on right now, there's a lot of like, they're really into like COVID safety and like, you know, your health.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of like on the network, there's a lot of like health related programs, right? And so like they're definitely you know, like you were just saying that woman was talking about, like, well, you know, since, you know, we haven't had much to do this year, we've been in lockdown, I've just been, you know, reading this book that's changed my life.
Right.
And it's obviously, you know, an L. Ron Hubbard book, a Scientology book, and the way that they're even using like taking advantage of even COVID and the lockdown, right? And like trying to and like they're obviously, by doing all these like commercials that I saw on the network about like germs and hand washing and COVID,
how to sanitize stuff, like instructions.
Right. It's all, exactly, and it's all intended to direct you to some fucking L. Ron Hubbard book.
It is.
Like they're even using the pandemic to do that. And I'll tell you, speaking of like these influencer type people, and I sent you this guy, and I've said this over and over on this program, on this episode now, but like just how much Scientology is at the crossroads of so many different types of scams. There's a great guy I discovered named Grant Cardone, who is like an internet influencer, like success win, fucking like.
This was the guy you sent in the chat, right?
He's so good. So I'm looking at grantcardone.com right now. And so he appears to be like a hedge fund guy. Okay, so it says, meet Grant Cardone, CEO of Cardone Capital, international speaker, entrepreneur, and author of the 10 Times Rule, and creator of 21 best-selling business programs. Grant Cardone owns and operates 7 privately held companies and a $1.5 billion portfolio of multifamily properties. Named the #1 marketer to watch by Forbes magazine, Cardone is also the founder of the 10 Times Movement and the 10 Times Growth Conference, the world's largest business and entrepreneur conference. And like on his website, like on the front page, is like a testimonial section, and it says what industry leaders have to say. And the most prominent one is 10 times is personal for everyone. 10 times is about achieving your ideal life. John Travolta. So,
motherfucker.
Right. So this is another guy who, this is one of the guys that goes to, is at the Clearwater facilities all the time. This guy, I can't even imagine how much money they fucking milked out of this fucking dude.
Is this the guy who had like Fat Joe working with him, or was that a different guy?
Yes.
God, yeah, dude.
No.
Fat Joe.
Yeah,
no.
we found this. We found this
Fat Joe. Oh,
we
God.
found his Twitter account, right? And there's some sort of event he was promoting that's going to have Fat Joe at it. Another really kind of funny little side note here. I don't know if so the first thing I sent you, Cari, about the Scientology network. So David Miscavige very rarely makes public appearances. Yeah. Like he's given one televised interview to Ted Koppel in 1992. He gave a
Ted Koppel.
David Miscavige, come on the podcast.
Yeah, really. He gave a newspaper interview. I think it might have been, I can't remember if it was the St. Pete Times or who it was, but he gave an interview to a newspaper in the late 90s. But like since like 2007, since like a lot of high profile people started leaving, the church started getting really bad press, and especially since the shit about his wife who is missing, he very, very rarely makes public appearances. But he did do a video which is available on YouTube, which I highly recommend anybody listening to this watch. 2 years ago, which was a video to announce the launch of the Scientology network. And there's just so many weird little threads and rabbit holes to go down if you watch this video. And one of the ones I found is these guys called the Jive Aces. Did you see this, Cari?
Yes, that was one of the videos that I watched on Meet a Scientologist. I like feverishly scribbled the Jive Aces in my handwritten notes. Yes.
Yeah, so the Jive Aces are an all Scientologist like swing revival band.
Yes,
it's been around.
Yes, yes, dude. Yes,
they've been around since the 80s, and they were.
How is this not the
lead? They were Britain's Got Talent semifinalists in 2012.
Right. Like I was saying, it's like people with niche reality TV competition wins.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, like this is the way, and they, like probably getting these guys on Britain's Got Talent was probably a fucking Scientologist op.
Exactly.
To like give good PR to the Church of Scientology. We can get these guys on TV. And they can talk about Scientology.
100%.
Look how normal. We're just normal swing revival guys.
Totally. Everybody does it. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Lindy Hop increases your thetans.
It's in Dianetics, man.
Xenu Riot.
Yeah.
Riot.
I like, dude, when you sent the Scientology network link, I I spent like 2 hours, like first thing in the morning, like watching all this stuff, and I feverishly scribbled all these notes, and I ran into the bedroom where Shane was like just half awake, and I was reading all this stuff down, like the Jive Aces or whatever, and he was like, "Are you on Adderall?" And I was like, "No, this is just amazing."
Yeah, I'm OT fucking 8
I'm
right
alive.
now.
Like, what the?
I am clear as fuck. Holy shit!
It's really it's amazing stuff. Like there was like choreographers. There was like a flute play. Like it's crazy. Like the reach that they have. Like you were saying, it's like so fucking insidious. It's not just like regular media people and like celebrities. It's like in every walk of life, they've got people.
Right. And, and you mentioned earlier, one thing I kind of like to circle back around and touch on when you were talking about, so what does the church have to have on Jada Pinkett Smith or whatever, right? Like what does the church have to have on people so that they're afraid to talk, right? And this is one of the things, and I talked about this concept in the last episode, right? So like what they call a sec check, a security check, right? So this is like when they use the e-meter essentially as a form of interrogation, right? And they're all filmed. They're all filmed with hidden camera. Mm-hmm. Tom Cruise's has been filmed.
And you tell all your secrets.
Travolta, all of these people, they tell all of their secrets. Oh, and here's another thing that we have not mentioned at all on this episode is that Scientology is, which is weird for it being so like sort of acceptable in a way in Hollywood, is that Scientology as a religion and L. Ron Hubbard as a person, incredibly viciously homophobic.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah. Super homophobic.
Yeah.
Homophobic. And so
I was going to ask you if you got to the part in the documentary where like there was the story of the gay guy who killed himself.
So one of L. Ron Hubbard's kids, Quentin, I think from his third wife, was gay, and he killed himself in 1976.
That's terrible.
I believe, right? Because he just could not find acceptance within the church, and so this is one of the long-running things, right? So in something like a security check, right? They ask you all of these very personal questions, right, about your sex life and all sorts of stuff, right? And so if someone did happen to be gay and has been conditioned for their entire life to, through the Church of Scientology to think that that's bad and that's wrong, and it's essentially like gay conversion therapy is what they're trying to do with this fucking the security check type of stuff. So this is the type of stuff they have on people. I mean, this has long been speculated as one of the things that keeps John Travolta in the church, because of course there's all of the rumors about him potentially being gay,
right.
And so this is what many people have speculated is one of the things that keeps him in the church. Tom Cruise as well.
Absolutely.
And so like when we talk about what do they have on these people, it could be anything, right? But it's more that it's more even than that. It is just the lengths that they'll go, like we said, to stalk and to harass you once you leave.
Right. Yeah. And they don't just do this to like people like Mike Rinder and Leah Remini. Like it's like regular people. Like if you're a regular person who tries to leave the church, as soon as they realize, like within 20 minutes of you like leaving your house, if they realize you're gone, I think they call it a drill. Maybe like you came across this, Chris. Like everybody who lives in the same area as you, like it becomes like a fire drill to find you, and they will literally chase you down.
It's really, I called it gang stalking on the last episode. It really is like
literally.
Gang stalking.
Yes,
it literally is real gang stalking. And another thing, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention. I've kind of mentioned it in passing, but not just the abuse that you'll suffer at the hands of the church if you leave, but the abuse that people suffer at the hands of David Miscavige directly, who are still in the church, right? So David Miscavige is very famous for publicly berating people and yelling at people, right, and beating the shit out of people. Like if you fail him, if he puts a completely unreasonable task in your hands that you're supposed to take care of, and then you fail at that task. And again, like this is what we said earlier about how if you fail at something, it's your fault.
It's your own failing.
So if David Miscavige beats the shit out of you, which he has done many times to people in the Sea Org, to his closest lieutenants, right? So there's one thing that comes up in Going Clear, like the documentary, in the book, and also in in Leah Remini's show, is the hole that they call it, right? Which is it's been discussed on Leah Remini's show. It's been discussed in Going Clear, and there's an article that the Tampa Bay Times did. Used to be the St. Pete Times did back in I think 2009, called "The Truth Rundown," which is a 3-part expose all about David Miscavige's personal abuse towards other people in the church. And I took a few notes from that. I just wanted to read off a few things here. So, physical violence permeated Scientology's internal management team. Miscavige set the tone, routinely attacking his lieutenants. Rinder says the leader attacked him more than 50 times. That's Mike Rinder, who used to be the second in command. Rathburn, Rinder, and DeVoe, these are all people who've now left the church, admit that they too attacked their colleagues to demonstrate loyalty to Miscavige and prove their mettle. Staffers are disciplined and controlled by a multi-layered system of ecclesiastical justice. It includes publicly confessing sins and crimes to a group of peers, being ordered to jump into a pool fully clothed, facing embarrassing security checks, or worse, being isolated as a suppressive person. At the pinnacle of the hierarchy, Miscavige commands such power that managers follow his orders, however bizarre, with lemming-like obedience. Church staffers, we touched on this last episode, church staffers covered up how they botched the care of Lisa McPherson, a Scientologist who died after they held her for 17 days in isolation at Clearwater's Fort Harrison Hotel. Rathburn, who Miscavige put in charge of dealing with the fallout from the case, admits that he ordered the destruction of incriminating evidence. He and others also revealed that Miscavige made an embarrassing miscalculation on McPherson's Scientology counseling. With Miscavige calling the shots and Rathburn among those at his side, the church muscled the IRS into granting Scientology tax-exempt status, offering fresh perspective on one of the church's crowning moments. Rathburn details an extraordinary campaign of public pressure backed by thousands of lawsuits. We talked about this earlier on this episode. So this is the thing that's really, and you brought up ExxonMobil earlier, Dwight, and I've been thinking about this ever since, and just in how insidious the power that David Miscavige personally holds is, right? Because, the Church of Scientology has, a few $1 billion in the bank. He's obviously very, very rich. As far as his influence and the control that he has, right, it's not as far-reaching as that of, ExxonMobil or, a politician or, a big company or something like that. But, the amount of control that he does have is total.
Yes.
It's complete. It's his total control over the people that he has under his thumb, right? Even though it is a smaller number of people than, let's say, a company like ExxonMobil or a big company like that, the effect that they have is much farther reaching. But
there's a model for them to follow.
Yes.
Sure. You know what I'm saying? There's a model. Again, within capitalism, there's a model with them to follow, which is to A, exploit tax codes, and B, they disrupted the religion industry.
God.
You know what
Is there a Scientology app? I'm going to look right now.
I tried to see if there was a Scientology video game, and I was really surprised when there wasn't. But there is.
It would
Actually,
be
there
cool
is
if
an
you
app.
could check your E-levels or whatever with a QR code or something.
There's a Scientology Network app.
I downloaded the Scientology Network app, and then I realized I should not have done that, and I uninstalled it.
Yeah, I'm downloading it right now. I'm going to have...
But okay.
Yeah. Well, too
something
late.
that I thought of when you were talking about the whole was Rehabilitation Project Force. Did you read about that? And you're
I did.
They have these systems in place. The Rehabilitation Project Force specifically is for just Sea Org members, and it's just basically a fucking re-education camp where they put people in sweatsuits and re-indoctrinate them and re-brainwash them into the religion. This is what happens to the people that get away and then are recaptured during those drills. And they just have this, like you were saying, the power that they have within the church is absolute. Somebody like David Miscavige, somebody who's high up and reports him, can just tell everybody in an area to be like, go get this person right now, and we're bringing them to re-indoctrinate them. If we don't do this, they're going to die. They're going to take psychic damage. We need to fix them. Right. And they just, it's we know that it's a cult, but it's just these internal mechanisms that they have they're so complete. They have a solution for everything. And that's why they're able to keep these people in. We're saying the membership numbers are declining. There are people that are being deprogrammed and leaving, but the control that they have over their members is like huge, and it is all in place to keep them exhausted and keep them in the system. Like, the one thing that we haven't mentioned that I think about a lot is I saw a lot of stories in my research and like when I've watched like the Leah Remini documentary of people who said when they were teenagers they would have classes for like 12 hours a day or something, and they would get like a 5-minute break, and in that 5-minute break you have somebody telling you sign this billion-year contract to join Sea Org right now, or you can't go to the fucking bathroom. And after like a month of that, you're like, I just want to go to the bathroom. I'll sign the contract. I'll do whatever.
Right, and this is one of the things. Yeah, they intentionally keep people exhausted, like you're saying. I mean, they sleep deprivation is a very common tool. This goes all the way back to L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard did this on the Apollo, on the ship he had with the Sea Org, right? So, like, I mean, these people, as punishment, like the Sea Org members, I mean, you'd have to like clean the fucking toilets, clean the bathroom, clean the ship with a toothbrush or something. You'd have to do it for like, days straight, right? Your the total amount of time that you were allowed to sleep might be like an hour a night if you were lucky, right? And this continues according to Ron Miscavige's book. This is still the way that things are carried on at the Gold Base in California, which is where Sea Org members and people who live year round, right, and work full time for the Church of Scientology, they are very commonly deprived of sleep. Another common punishment is feeding someone a diet of nothing but rice and beans for like weeks on end, right? That's a punishment. They fuck with your diet. They fuck with your sleep.
They control every aspect of your life. They can fuck with anything.
They control every aspect of your life. They live in like a dormitory type setting. The rooms are totally sterile. You can have no personal effects, no personal items, no televisions, no radios, absolutely no internet.
That's how David Miscavige's dad got like deprogrammed. Accidentally got a Kindle with internet.
Exactly. Exactly. So David got his father a Kindle for his birthday that he didn't know connected to the internet. And to hear Ron Miscavige tell the story, he like just innocently, he wasn't even trying to see anything bad. He wanted to see like, I wonder what, I'm hearing all the time about all the good works that the charitable work that Scientology does, and all these awards we get and all the accolades we get. So, he wanted to look that up on the internet. And of course, all he found was, nothing but bad press, right? That this is a cult. But yeah, the people at the Gold Base, what?
Just innocently Googling Scientology. Like, what?
I mean, it is really interesting. Like what it takes for somebody to be deprogrammed. It could be very little.
He'd been in the church for 40 years. He'd never known anything else at this point. He'd never been on the internet.
He probably had never like had fucking email. Like they keep you so fucking controlled. That's how they're able to brainwash. Like for us, it's like we grew up seeing like South Park episodes or whatever. Imagine like somebody who's like our age. Like that's what I kept thinking when I saw that like VFX artist named like Brian. I remember his name. He felt like somebody. I guess Shane, we have like a lot of friends that like went to film school with you. Like they do those kinds of jobs. I was like, this guy could like be our friend, but this guy is somebody who was probably like raised in Scientology. You know what I mean? Like he never saw like those South Park episodes. It's not a fucking joke to him. Like this is his fucking life, and it's horrific.
Right. And the internet has not been kind to the church, and it seems that the clock has to be ticking, right? I mean, their membership is tanking. It has been for the better part of 10 or 15 years. That's why they're doing this big push on social media and with the Scientology network is to try to gin up good PR for themselves, because they are losing membership, right? The membership is dwindling no matter what they say. And this is, again, why David Miscavige is never seen publicly. And this is why they spend all the fucking money on real estate and everything, because they are absolutely terrified of anybody taking a close look at this thing. And I would like to, we should probably get close to wrapping this up here soon, because this has been 4 hours.
It's good. It's really good.
It's been incredible for me. I mean, I've read nothing but this shit for the past
I could talk about this for like 4 more hours. So
same. And I feel like I've fucking exercised a demon out of me just getting it all out over the past 4 hours. But this is incredibly important stuff, and I hope that in the smallest way that maybe somebody who maybe didn't know quite how far this shit goes and how bad this shit is, maybe now knows after listening. And I would like to hope that, I mean, if enough people fucking talk about this shit, and if enough people look into this, that, I mean, it's on shaky foundation, right? All this shit has to fucking, I mean, all that's going to happen is for a lawsuit, David Miscavige to get a lawsuit, or for them to, be investigated by the IRS or anything like that. I mean, this really just needs to be fucking, it needs to see the light of day, right? All of this fucking horrible shit that's going on there. It's really incredible that it's allowed to persist for as long as it has, and with the credibility that's been granted to it by people like John Travolta and Tom Cruise and celebrities who, man, it's hard to know their minds, right? Like, are they true believers, or does the church have something on them, or
both,
are they
maybe? Who
just
knows?
Scared, or are they just terrified?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
What I was just thinking is, like, as like you were saying, like, you have to think like the clock is ticking. Like, there's so many people exposing this, not just like because of people being able to like search Google or whatever, but like people like Leah Remini, like Mike Rinder speaking out. Right. But like the sad reality is that, like, as long as there are vulnerable people that are overlooked by society, there is going to be the environment for cults to thrive. Like, that's just the reality of it. There's just huge chunks of the population that capitalism just throws away, and they are able to just go to people who are like, either mentally ill and vulnerable, who can't get the care that they need, or they're able to go to like drug addicts, like we talked about before, or homeless people. And those are people that they can then recruit to perpetuate this. Like you said, it's a self-perpetuating system. And as long as there are those people, not just Scientology, but like any cult that's based around the exploitation of people is going to keep thriving.
Right.
Chris, when you were talking and you mentioned just now, like, the idea that you hope that, in some small way, and obviously there's kind of like a deluge of Scientology content, right? There was like a bunch of stuff out there, and you're talking about, like, maybe in some small way, like our show, whatever, also puts a dent in it. I gotta be honest, after looking into this myself and looking at Revolt in the Stars, it's worked the opposite way for me. I'm in.
I know.
I'm ready.
I know you're like joking, but like, as I was watching the Scientology network for like fucking 12 hours, I was like, I could absolutely see when I was like at the lowest point of my life how this could suck me in. Like, I could just absolutely fucking see it.
There's some times where I'm just like, fuck, should I just really get into God?
That's what I.
Like, it's so bleak.
Of course.
And it's just like,
But why get into God if you can get into yourself? There you go. I guess you have to be somebody like me for that to be an appealing alternative.
But I mean, really, like they have like purposely targeted this at like people who are like alone and like isolated or suffering from addiction and mental illness. And the sad part is that, like we've talked about, once you get into the Church of Scientology, if you are mentally ill or if you do have like a drug addiction or anything like that, like all they're going to do is like physically and mentally abuse you. One of the stories that stuck with me the most from that Leah Remini documentary was like this woman went on, I think she was like the daughter of like a Hollywood person. She's like an artist now, but she had a friend who was in the church, and she said over a period of like years, she saw this woman posting like, the church is lying about me and I need help and I don't know why they're saying this. And this is somebody who was like in the church. She had like an abusive ex-boyfriend, and she also, I believe, had like bipolar disorder. And of course, within the church, you can't get real treatment for bipolar disorder. They just do like introspection rundowns or whatever. And this is somebody who was like her close friend growing up, because they both grew up in Scientology. The girl being interviewed was somebody who had gotten out of Scientology, but what happened to her friend was that she ended up committing suicide. And this is like a very common story. Like it happens all the time, and there's the stories that we hear about, but there's like countless stories that we don't know about. Like it just happens all the fucking time, and it's heartbreaking. It's horrible.
Yeah, I do. I appreciate the way you just put that as well. Is that this is what one of the byproducts of like the lack of any sort of social safety net, right? As far as like nothing in place to help.
Well said.
Nothing in place to help the mentally ill,
where else can
or
you
the drug
turn?
addicted, or the homeless, or anything. So you didn't, right? Then you leave it open for a predatory institution like this to come in and scoop these people up under the guise that they're helping them.
Yeah, that's why stuff like, on a less harmful level like multi-level marketing schemes exist and stuff. Like there is just this huge opening in our society for predatory organizations to just ruin people's lives.
At first glance, the room seemed bare. Red velvet drapes hung askew, red carpet littered with paper and discarded weapons. The massive black desk was smothered in scatters of files. Rawl took this all in a flash, then brought his gaze to rest on the floor under the window. There, slumped down, were 5 men. Rawl walked slowly, cautiously even, towards them. Stopping before them, Rawl regarded the 5 men with contempt. Zell was white-faced with fear. Chi was panting, his hand raised to ward off imagined horrors. Sty lay stiffly, as if he were one of his own patients, or victims, rather. Chu the banker would not meet Rawl's eyes, concentrating as he was on not vomiting from total shattering terror.
I'm sorry, did
And
they
lastly-
name the banker Chu?
Kind of sus.
And lastly, Xenu. He was slightly more composed than the rest. Rawl's lip curled. Well, here they were, the kingpins. Not so brave now, but weren't all criminals basically cowards at heart?
Oh, wow. Okay.
You calling the Joker a coward?
That just like that just reminded me of like one of the segments on the Scientology network was like talking about criminals, and it was showing like this like white guy being in prison and being like very like vulnerable, and like a bunch of like scary black guys attacking him and saying how bad like real criminals were. And it was like, this is like really fucking racist.
There was one bit I don't think I mentioned when I did the full rundown last night of the Revolt in the Stars story, but there was one scene when at the very beginning, when Xenu is like challenged by the Senate of loyal officers or whatever, there's like a succession of, you can imagine in a film like a montage, like again, like at the end of Star Wars, like cutting from space to space to space of everybody celebrating that like the income tax is abolished, right?
Yeah, the Ewoks stood at
right, exactly. and one of the scenes, because one of the arguments that is made, and it's very like, it's very terrible writing, and I think I mentioned it when we were talking about it, but it's like Neil Breen-esque writing where like, everybody's going like, but Xenu, that's corrupt and
Isn't
evil.
that corrupt?
Income tax increases crime.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in then that celebratory moment where there's a scene where it's like literal criminals who have like assault weapons in their like hover car or whatever. They hear the news on the space radio that like the income tax is abolished. And they start celebrating, and they go and they take their automatic weapons out of the car and they put them in a dumpster.
Nice. Okay.
To be like, we don't need to do crime ananymore. Like the whole motivation that we have to do crime is gone
Politics of
because
this are so fucked
there's no
up.
more IRS.
Yeah.
My allegiance to anarcho-capitalism, to democracy!
I got like really strong libertarian vibes, and what I kept thinking when you were like reading last night was like the L in L. Ron Hubbard stands for libertarian. So I just had to say that to get out of my brain.
I mean, I think I already made this joke last night, but the only thing that was missing from that entire sequence was Xenu going like, and now finally we will impose age of consent laws on the galaxy.
I mean,
like that was the only bit that was
and
missing.
once again, and I think that this could be like just the little wrap up takeaway from my side is like they do have like an analog to that in Scientology, which is like the implication that there is no such thing as children. That's why they have people like sign billion-dollar contracts, break relationships with their parents, and like I think like as socialists or communists or however you identify, I assume you're like some kind of leftist person listening to this podcast. We care about systemic issues, but we also care about like this individual suffering that's happening, and this has become kind of like a meme for our generation. And there is a lot of like weird, funny shit in it that we're taking in. There is just like a lot of like deep suffering that is, being overlooked and forgotten and like is being allowed to happen and is being facilitated by capital. Like all of this shit runs on like real estate deals like we were talking about and is facilitated by like a government that's either being bought or being like influenced or being scared, like whether it's the IRS or the local government in Clearwater. Like this is something that we should like deeply care about and want to like get rid of. Like this, it's deeply evil. It's like deeply diseased.
And it's out of that deep exploitation and suffering that, there is an attractiveness for something like this for people that are completely demoralized. And I love, to your point, Chris, that, it's exactly because people don't have a social safety net that this just like, why the fuck is my life shit?
Yes.
Right.
Here's an answer, and an exploitative answer at that.
Right, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And again, they like have really sophisticated tools of propaganda. They have like a very deep bench of like people and like a very sophisticated toolkit to try to draw regular people in. Like imagine you're like at the lowest point of your life and somebody's like, oh, hey, you like skateboarding? Check out this video. And it's the video of the guy just talking about how shitty his life was. And then he doesn't mention Scientology at all until you've already been watching him for 30 minutes and identifying with him. Like that is how they get people. And it is really sad. Like even if you're somebody that like can seek help in this system or like has somewhat of a safety net, it's still like very difficult if you have like, severe mental illness or like drug addiction. Like it's very hard, and that's what leaves the opening for this.
I think to that point too, right? Like, if you're listening to this and having gone through maybe that stage of like, finding it amusing and feeling that kind of despair, like, oh, these people are like still operating, they're still around, right? Like, there is a very simple solution to this, right? In terms of like, how do you address this? How do you deal with this? And in terms of like looking at it, structurally and stuff. And the answer to that can be found on the newest Patreon tier that we're going to create, which is ETR level 2.
Oh, no.
And so for only $200 a day, you can learn the tools and trade of the how to combat your mind enemies using a few pieces of metal I will weld together and send to your house.
Or maybe you won't.
Is this an MF Doom reference?
I mean, again, like I want to like really hammer home the point how much this is driven by like a culture of like consumerism being normalized, and it is driven by capitalism. Like I think we touched on this yesterday. Like every couple of years, they're just like every book that you've ever bought that you already spent like $50,000 on and mortgaged your house on is fucking useless.
Right.
If you want to like go clear or whatever, you have to spend $50,000 more to buy these other books. And
there's new developments, new research.
And
it's like Warhammer.
It is not like Warhammer, okay? My Slanesh proxies.
It's basically like Warhammer.
My Slanesh proxies that I bought on Etsy are totally different from the different OT levels and books that you have to buy. Okay? Anyways.
My yacht is being prepared by loyal officers of the Sea Corps. We will set sail to a tax haven somewhere in the South Pacific or perhaps the Caribbean. And there I will write my final tome. It will be an angry screed against my therapists and the IRS. Their constant demands for tax forms are essentially slavery.
Now witness the power of this fully armed and operational estate tax.
Death panel!
Oh, God. God damn it. Yeah.
All right,
folks.
All right, good night.
Good luck.
Stay
Stay
cool.
cool.
Check out the Scientology Network live feed on YouTube.
Oh, please.
Please go to Meet a Scientologist.
It will be broadcast to your home.
Yeah, check out how really...
And any device you choose.
Check out how really deeply insidious this is. It's definitely, like, significantly worse than you think.
Did somebody say sidious?
Stay cool.
Stay cool, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Farewell. For now.
Words from a book showed me the way to be free of the shadows of yesterday. But the price of that freedom we all must pay from now on. Ooh, joining together we held our ground, and we lifted our voices one mighty sound. decided to take a stand to defend the rights of man. We stand tall, no turning back. We found a way. We stand tall, ever strong. We'll live on. We stand tall, knowing the truth will set us free and take us from clear to eternity, to a future we thought would never be. We stand tall, and your legacy is secure, for we'll keep your vision pure.